Welcome to the third webinar of my 3-webinar series. In the first webinar, I showed 12 different businesses and how they're using offshoring to maximise their efficiencies, and hopefully out of that you've gained some really good ideas how you can use offshoring in your business. In the second webinar, I discussed some of the cultural differences and management techniques that are used to maximise productivity from a Filipinos team. And in this webinar, I discussed the 7 different ways that you can engage people or services. So, we're going to talk today a lot about what they cost, not what they're paid. I know that I'm very guilty for saying that, $100 a week Filipinos. The reality is that that is what the gross pay of most Filipinos are paid, in the order of that. But that, of course, like in Australia or any other country, the gross pay is not what they cost at the end of the day. So for us to get a true idea of this, we're going to talk, we're just going to compare costings across the different models, and hopefully out of that you'll understand how each model may or may not suit you, with an idea of cost as well, so we understand the association between them. So to start with, let's talk about a fairly typical business in Australia that incorporated in Australia and employs a typical administration worker, just a clerical administration role. And I know this salary is a bit low. That's fine. If we set this benchmark at a low number, the other numbers are all pretty close, so you'll get an idea of how they associate. So if we talk about this here, we're talking about typical gross pay in Australia of, say, $700 a week, and I know that's low. Now, if you were paying somebody a gross pay of $700 a week, typically you would have on costs, work cover, super, holidays and all that sort of thing, of an extra $120 a week. I can tell you that a large group of friends and myself took all our businesses, we looked at our building costs, our rents or our payments or whatever our building costs were, we divided it by the number of workers we had in them, and we got a figure of $60 a week. And we also looked at our equipment, our management costs, doing the payroll, support costs, all those things as well. And per worker, that came out to about $150 a week. So it'd be fair to say that a typical administration worker on $700 a week, in fact, is costing the business in Australia, $1,030 a week. And if we take that and we put it in the top line up here, we insert it in our little chart, $1,030 a week. If we do the calculation on that, using a 38-hour week, we get $27 per hour, or $4,450 per week, or $53,506 a year. Now these are all Australian dollars here we're talking about today. So if we use that as our benchmark to compare everything else, because when you're talking to most third-party providers in the Philippines, they're quoting you a finished number. They're quoting you so many dollars per month for the worker and all the equipment that goes with them, so you have to compare apples to apples. Now, so this is cost, not what they paid. I can't help but stress that. That's cost, not what they paid. So let's have a look at how this industry originated. Roughly 20 years ago, the very large international companies, big corporate conglomerates, went into countries such as Poland, India, Philippines, Vietnam and a whole lot of other countries in Central America, etc. And they were able to tap into the very, very low wages base. Now, very large corporate companies use very, very structured processes. And they were able to drop those processes in and simply train the local workers to be able to follow structured processes. Because they didn't want to incorporate in the countries, they made a decision not to incorporate, and a third-party provider emerged that we call the corporate outsourcer. Now, this corporate outsourcer, they're a third party that sat in the middle between the very large corporates and the cheaper countries. They became very, very large. Today, they're still around, and they're still by far the majority in the industry. But some massive great companies out there. There's one in the Philippines called Convergys that has 70,000 employees, and those sort of numbers are quite typical. They emerged and they run very, very structured processes. So that was all fine. That worked very well for them. And about 7 or 8 years ago, small, medium-sized businesses, the internet sort of got a little more connectivity up. So the small, medium businesses also decided to try and use these guys for the same thing. And in Australia, a lot of accountants, a lot of engineers, all tried to outsource into countries like Vietnam and in India. They went to the corporate outsourcers and they said, can you run it for us? They said, yes, we can do anything. And if you talk to them today, and I know them all, if you talk to the accountants, they said, look, it didn't work out. We were a small company and they were such a large company and they didn't listen to us. If you talk to the corporate outsourcers, they will say those little companies, when they come up, they didn't have the robust set structures that are needed for outsourcing, and it didn't work. But at the end of the day, that fracturing of the relationship between small, medium businesses and the corporate outsourcers caused the whole of the outsourcing industry to get a bad name. Today they will still try and get you in, and they're quite desperate. They're on a decline as far as the industry is concerned. The big companies now getting game enough to incorporate themselves in these countries, and so that's one of their challenges. And so a lot of them are still trying very hard to get the smaller businesses in, and I'm endlessly pulling people out of trouble because they haven't got the structured processes. So if you're large and you've got very, very structured, robust systems, it's worthwhile looking at them. If you're not, then I suggest you give them and you avoid them. However, they do have a cost, and remembering that the large companies just pass a process to them. This corporate outsourcer turn the process into a training program. They develop the trainers, they go forth, they put the managers into place, they employ the people, they do everything and just hand back the solution to the business. That is why their cost typically runs at about $15 an hour, $600 a week, $2,600 a month, or $31,000 a year per seat, per person that's working in that environment. So that's the cost for the corporate outsourcers. That set the benchmark from 20 years ago. The world moved on a little bit from then. If you were to incorporate in the Philippines, and indeed today I have a couple of incorporated bodies in the Philippines, so these costs are very typical for what I've got in my businesses. If you were going to incorporate in the Philippines, the cost of the same person would actually be about $6 per hour, $240 a week, or $1,040 a month, $12,480 a year. However, there's an issue. Do not even consider it if you've got less than 25 seats, and not all, if you don't have at least 2 years experience in the Philippines. Incorporation here is totally different than anything in Australia. In mainland Philippines, there are some special economic zones where it's a lot easier, but in mainland Philippines, it often takes 6 months to incorporate a business. During that 6 months, you have to pay full commercial lease, because the incorporation process here is all based around the premises. You have to get permission from about 12 different government departments to use those premises for your business before you can even file for incorporation, and then that involves a whole lot of stuff as well, and it's in an environment that's not very friendly to Westerners at all, so we suggest you keep away from that. If you're under 25 seats and don't have at least 2 years experience, however, other models we're about to show are ideal to sit down so you can grow your business up to that size and then ultimately incorporate. So if you are going to start here, you need to start with the end in mind. If there's any possibility you're going to go bigger, you need to start with a solution, a third-party provider probably, who's got good friendly terms and conditions. If you want to go out and incorporate, you need to be able to take your staff easily without paying too much penalties, and you need to be in a location that's incorporation easy, which, as I mentioned before, there's a couple of very special economic zones here where it is a lot easier. If you are also going to incorporate, I do strongly recommend you get unbiased advice, and that's very difficult to get because there are several options about how you would go about incorporation, and that obviously a lot of Australian companies use a Hong Kong company in the middle, which sets up a good little legal blocking system which it protects your assets as well. So there are several different ways you can do it. You need to get good advice on that. A little chat to me probably wouldn't hurt as well. I have a little bit of knowledge around some of these things. I'm certainly not an expert on it, and I can probably point you in the direction of somebody who knows more about it. So about 10 years ago, an online platform where workers could register, where employers could register, and where they could find each other online, interview each other, and decide they wanted to work together, and then on that platform stay locked in, which ran the pay system, and also in many cases monitored the staff to make sure they were working and everything else emerged. The big player was a company called Odesk, which recently changed its name to Upwork. To give you an idea of how large this player is, Odesk, about 2 years ago when they last released their numbers, had 9.3 million workers, and they were servicing 3.6 million businesses. Interestingly, Australia is the second largest user of Odesk in the world. Freelancer is an Australian-owned company. I actually believe there's a lot of disruption going on in Australia at the moment, a lot of margin squeeze because of Odesk. Odesk can't be measured by the government. I did recently see some numbers, I haven't been able to confirm these yet, that something like 30% of Australian businesses are now using some sort of virtual offshoring platform of some sort. And if that's the case, 30% of businesses are using this to lower their overheads. And obviously, as time goes on, it reflects in their what they're charging, and that squeezes the margins back. And if you're one of the businesses not doing this, and you're having margin squeeze, it's possibly caused by this little fella called Odesk. Typically, home-based workers, sometimes the small teams under a house, $2 an hour and up. There's a lot of rubbish workers in there. There's also the odd good one amongst them. $4 to $5 an hour is the tipping point. That's pretty well the point of above $5 an hour, they're all happy and friendly. Below $4 an hour, and ultimately long term, they're going to find they're a bit lowly paid when they look at their cost of computer and cost of electricity and everything else. So it's about $4 to $5 an hour generally is the tipping point. Look, the only way you can assess a good virtual-based worker is to test them. You really can't read resumes. You can't tell a lot in interviews. You still read resumes and you do the interviews, but you really need to come up with some really practical testing systems to do that. Once again, if you want to know about some interesting testing programs that I use, I'm happy to share that if anybody contacts me. Look, Odesk or Upwork or any of the virtual base, and there's hundreds of them out there, that's the big one. Look, they're really, really good for a single full-time employee that's never going to be connected or part of the team. My personal PA, my personal assistant, her name's Emma, she is an Odesker, or should say Upwork nowadays. She works on Upwork for me. I have 5 businesses at the moment in 3 different countries. Each one of those people involved in those businesses, as well as where she's my personal assistant. I keep her out of the politics of all the business by employing her separately, and Odesk makes an easy platform for me to have it. It controls her time, her working hours, and it also automatically pays her at the end of the week, so I don't have to do anything, and it eliminates any legal issues as well. So it's just a good way for me to hire one full-time employee, devoted, complete full-time employee. And in fact, I've had an Odesk Upwork PA working for me for now nearly 14 years in the Philippines, and during that time I've gone through three different PAs. So it is a pretty good long-term relationship with that type of thing. They're also good for projects, very structured set projects. We use them a lot today just for quick jobs, might be doing a bit of video work or get something special set up. We recently used them to teach us how to run these webinars. They're very good for that sort of project stuff, and you can get some really cool specialised skills if you dig around. They are not repeat good for part-time. I get a lot of people come to me and I've had problems with Upwork, and I sit down and talk to them. I say, what happened? And they say, well, I keep hiring somebody and it just keeps falling over. And I say, well, what are you doing? And they say, well, I hire them for 20 hours a week. And I go, well, there's your problem right there. At the rates of pay that you're paying them in these platforms, they need 40 hours a week to feed their family. Now, we're beyond the idea of concept of feeding the family, but they're still in the notion of getting enough money just to feed the family. And they need 40 hours a week to do that. You give them 20 hours a week, they spend the other 20 hours a week plus some more hunting for another employer. Because you've employed them, they're ranked up, they can see you, that's the way the system works, they look more attractive. It doesn't take very long for them to find another employer who often will come along, and I've done this myself, offer them a full-time role at 40 hours a week, and then that's when things start getting very interesting, because most of them get smart and they go, you know what, I can do the 20 hours for this guy, and I can do the 40 hours for that person, I'll work a 60-hour week. And sadly, about 3 months later, it normally always falls apart and ends in tears. And the person that hired them for 20 hours of the week is the one that's on the outer. So ongoing part-time, I suggest you avoid in Odesk. I suggest that with these rates of pay, you make the role full-time. Remembering if it's got to be not part of a team, you make the rate full-time and you find some extra work for them, probably generating more customers. They're also not good for teams. And I believe roughly around about above 5. I've seen some very large teams on Upwork that have had a lot of strife and a lot of productivity issues. I've seen them converted to the much higher cost staff leasing, and the productivity that's gained easily outweighs the extra cost. Once again, if somebody offline wants to chat to me about this, I can probably even point you on who they are and what they're doing and what happened. But I can tell you now that, in my opinion, virtual home-based workers not connected together are no good for building a team environment, and you require a team environment to grow your business. Building tacit knowledge in the team is a very, very important part of productivity in any of the Western work environment. In fact, you may have noticed that not too many years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, there was a lot of talk about home-based workers around and everything else, and all that talk sort of evaporated and disappeared. And indeed today, if you go and look at Apple and Google and all those lovely big employers that like to do the right thing and have their funky little workplaces, they have all come back to office-based systems, office-based employees, because it's much, much more productive than the home-based ones. So that's the thing. So, and also for the worker itself, working from home has its challenges. However, we put it up on our board here to do our comparison, and we're looking at $6 an hour, $240 a week, $1,040 a month, $12,400 all up. Indeed, the same cost as incorporating us as well. There is a model that fits in between. I call it the under-house team. This is where you find a very trusted trustee and effectively set them up in their own business, hiring your team under their house. Look, you should keep it exclusive to you. Don't let anybody else get involved in it, because that's when it gets really ugly. But listen, this, like paying them directly, is fraught with danger. Every country in the world has legislation that requires employers to be registered. It is the basis of collecting tax. And when they find unregistered employers, every country in the world reacts very, very aggressively to that. And indeed, I have pulled 2 Australians now, got into deep, deep trouble here in the Philippines, because they built a reasonable sized team under a house. One had 12 and the other one had 15. What happened in both cases, a disgruntled employee left. He reported to the authorities that they weren't doing the right thing. The authorities came out, and it's the same in every country. The authorities took one look at an illegal workplace with unregistered workers underneath a house, and of course they reacted accordingly. One of the people actually got arrested at the airport. They were that aggressive about what happened. So paying them direct is something you should avoid and not do. There's an underlying culture up here to want more. They need to be set up legally, because the industrial relations laws are strict here, and as I said before, complaints from ex-staff are common. You can find yourself shut down overnight. And both those other teams I talked about were shut down instantaneously. They simply went boom, disappeared off the air. One of the guys flew up from Australia to find out what's going on, and that's when he got arrested. So don't want to do that. And yes, this is all without mentioning the corruption factor that we have here. When the local authorities find out about it, believe me, if they find out there's a white employer behind it, you're really going to know about that. It's just the way the system works here. There is another model where you can put Odeskers or Upwork people into serviced offices. That sort of works okay, but honestly, when I've seen it and costed out, it really is not worth the exercise at the end, and it's a little bit non-permanent, I think, is one of the issues that we got with it. And there's an issue with all these virtual-based workers around HMO or health insurance. When you have full-time employees in the Philippines, they get health insurance for themselves and their families, and they value that very much. When you're working from home in a virtual thing, you don't get that health insurance, and that has a factor as well that weighs into this as well. I want to go on now and talk about the one that's really booming, the one that's really making big, big differences out there, and that's one called staff leasing or co-managed. This has really emerged from the problems and issues that the corporate outsourcing had, and the problems and issues that I've already talked about with virtual home-based workers. The biggest player is a company called Microsourcing. It's now, actually that's incorrect there, 51% is not correct anymore. It's now 100% owned by an Australian company, listed company called Salmat. And there's many copycats and lots of them around, and nearly every day there's new ones opening up. Just be careful, make sure you get somebody who's specialising in this field, not just adding it on to part of another business. What they do is that they provide the desk, the computer, most of them will do recruitment for you, and they all provide HR, which is just the behaviour management. So if there's a problem with the staff being unreliable, then their HR manager will step in. They need to do that because the industrial relations laws make them responsible. And importantly, very importantly, they supply the legal employer entity. So most of them charge a desk fee for the plus a desk fee of X number of dollars plus X number of dollars per month for wages. There are variances around that, but pretty well, quite often you'll find they charge a desk fee and then there's some wages around that. You nominate what skills are needed, you have input into wages, you select from a short list, you then train them, you direct them, and they manage them. Now, this is the cool bit. It's exactly the same as you've been doing in Australia. They are your people, in your space, under your instruction, with your culture, developing and sharing a tacit knowledge. And I am seeing firsthand some absolutely amazing productivity from building these teams up here. I really am. You know, these teams are typically got everything together. You'd have a Webby and you'd have a marketing person. You've probably got a couple of salespeople. You've got administration. You've got accounts receivable, accounts payable, and you've got whatever expertise you are, be engineers or accountants or whatever it is, all together in one space, all working for the same company, all sharing that. Often you don't have to be up here to do it, but as you get bigger and bigger, you'll possibly send some permanent expats up here to do it, but at the start you don't. You can do it by remote control. I've done it now by remote control. I did it myself. It can be done, and it's a great stepping stone to incorporation. So staff leasing or co-managed, we're talking out $10 an hour, $400 a week, $1,700 a month, or $20,000 a year. Remembering that, we're comparing that to the same worker in Australia, $27 an hour, $1,050 a week, $4,400 a month, $54,000 a year. So that's just apples for apples comparing it across there. There is a little twist to it. Quite often legislation or customer contracts require you to not outsource anything. If that's the case, it's quite common for companies to use to incorporate here, but still use a staff leasing business. In that case, we call it seat leasing, where you just lease the seat. A little bit just like serviced offices, except that they're also providing other stuff. They normally also provide the payroll services, because believe it or not, payroll's really complicated here, and you don't want to learn how to do that. You might as well just tap into somebody else and pay the extra 10% on top of whatever it is to run payroll with somebody else. It's usually used with a branch office incorporation, which is a different type of incorporation where the company in Australia is directly the owner of the company in the Philippines. That gives it a line through, which means it's not a different it's not outsourcing, it's being done inside the same thing. It circumvents the production. Look, it works in special circumstances, and I've actually been involved with a large company, debt collecting company in Australia, had obligations that it couldn't outsource. It's got a huge team up here running a branch office thing, looking everybody in the eye and saying, well, all our people. It doesn't say anything about which country, and it's pretty well the way it is. So that's that model. Going on, there's another model that a lot of people coming on my tour use, called specialised outsourcing. Roughly $22 an hour. You know, you're getting from $20 to $28 an hour is typical, but 22. And these are the same services that you would typically outsource to in Australia. And the common one is accountancy. It's also common for you to outsource IT, possibly marketing and all those sort of things. But you can get accountancy services in the Philippines that are exactly the same as the accountancy services that you're paying for now. They do your BAS, they do everything except for tax advice. And they do your books, do your bookkeeping, which is disappearing from automation now, but that's another thing. But they do all your financial statements, your balance sheets, your financial returns to put into the government and all that sort of thing. Where in Australia you would probably be typically paying around about $300 an hour as a base rate on that. Same thing up here, fully Australianised, $19 to $20 an hour, depending on the quality of the partner that's looking after you. Now, what's interesting about this is part of what I teach when I do my tour and I teach what's really happening in the world. I believe that if employment is the third wave of change to sweep around the world, then these services selling direct B2B are the coming fourth wave. And I'm seeing a great growth of this. I think professional services are really going to change here. And I'm very aware of people Australians that are operating in Manila at the moment, building teams around law and those sort of things, doing exactly the same thing. It's all coming, and it's a big change about to sweep through the world in the near future. So, one more just to mention, and on the side, there's a thing out there called crowdsourcing, specialised small tasks. Things like Fiverr, Up, Gigabucks, Design Cloud, 99 Designs, CloudSpring, and the funny one, the one that a lot of people use, and if you've never tried it, please go and try it. It's called Fiverr with 2 R's. So Fiverr with 2 R's, you go in, you sign up, everything's $5. They now sell a few multiples of $5, but it's all right. And you can get some pretty cool things done for $5 in there. And one of my companies gets all the voiceovers for its phone system done in Fiverr. You just simply send a little script up, ka-ching, $5 later, $5, and probably a couple of hours later you've got it back all professionally recorded, ready to go. There's a whole lot of little animations we have on our websites, all that sort of stuff. You can get those, believe it or not, done for $5. Quite amazing. So that's worth a dig around, and lots of other. 99 Designs is a very popular one too for doing designs and getting the crowd, the power of the crowd to be able to come up with a good design for you. So they crowdsourcing, specialised small projects. When you're looking at offshoring, it is part of the offshoring mix, so I mention it here as well. So let's go back and do a summary and overall look at what we've got here. There's the whole lot laid out that I've talked about. Incorporation in Australia will cost you $27 an hour. Incorporate for the same worker in the Philippines, $6 an hour. There's a massive difference there. Run them home-based, but not good for teams, unfortunately, $6 an hour. If you want to build your own team and get some real productivity, $10 an hour with co-staff leasing, and then corporate outsourcing, of course, is $15 an hour. They do everything for you and give you back the result. Specialised outsourcing, typically $25 an hour or thereabouts. So there they all laid out on the board there, with on my little chart, and down the bottom is sort of what they're best for and not best for as you go through. Look, you really must start with the end in mind. One of the big traps here is very difficult to change from one to the other. You cannot build a small team of home-based workers and then move them into a staff leasing or co-managed space. There's a massive difference in salaries, a massive difference in conditions, and most of them physically don't want to be there, and there's a distance thing. It's very, very difficult. So if there's any chance that you're going to go more than 2 or 3 people or more than 5 people, then unfortunately home base is not going to really work for you that well. You need to go co-managed or staff leasing. If there's any chance that you may get up over 25 people, and I'm going to say nobody expects to, but nearly everybody does. When I started offshoring in the Philippines, I swore that I was only ever going to have 5 people. Today in that particular business, I'm up to 45 people and still growing. Why? Because it works beautifully, and as you get in and learn how to make it work properly, it's a phenomenal thing. And therefore, you've got to start. We can probably ultimately move out and incorporate as you will. So start it with the end in mind. Sit down in your wildest dreams. Where might you be 3 to 5 years from now? And that's how you should start when you start with your offshoring. This webinar was part 3 of a 3-part series. As I said before, the first webinar I showed you 12 different business models that have emerged and that are using offshoring. The second webinar I discussed the culture differences and management techniques that help maximise the productivity of your team. And in this one, of course, I've discussed the 7 different ways you can engage services or people with some costings around it. Well, they're benchmark costings, but they're an idea to understand how they all work together. Many fail to maximise this great opportunity because they don't know what they don't know. So my intention is to address this. I conduct 3-day intensive business learning tours. I've been doing this now for 4 years. I've had over 340 people on tour to date. The vast majority have set up highly successful businesses. Some of them have grown enormously large, and it is a great thing to do. You need to understand it. On my 3-day intensive business learning, you come up to Manila. You actually visit 2 cities. We split it across 2 cities. You're here for 3 days on the tour, and suggest you come up a day early and stay a couple of days later as well. You need to do that as well. I'm going to take you on an amazing offshoring and entrepreneurial journey. 2 parts of it. I'm going to teach you offshoring, and I'm really going to give you a big dose of entrepreneurship at the same time. You're going to see different ways you can engage people or services with the do's and don'ts. You will see the simple, cost-effective ways that you can develop your business or a new business. And you're going to learn from the real entrepreneurs who are doing it. Like guys like myself, I'm going to take you into some of my workplaces, introduce you to my staff, give you the freedom to talk to them, and we're going to share what we did wrong, how we did it wrong, how we fixed it up, and what we're doing, and how much productivity we're getting. And that's going to happen in about 20 different workplaces that we visit in the 3 days. So it's full on, it is intensive. There's 2 or 3 large lectures as well where we teach the theory, and then we go out and visit and look at it from a practical point of view. I'm also a serial entrepreneur, and I'm going to challenge and help you build your business model. I'm really going to challenge you to get into a growth mode. I really believe that businesses are about profit, they're about growth, they're about staying up with the leading edge and following the market changes, and the 4th thing that's really important, they're about more time for the business owner for themselves. So that's systems and processing and getting other people to do it. I'll push those 4 points on the tour and push you into that with your business model. I believe you need to learn before you do it, and you can learn from my mistakes and from my successes. So that's all packaged under the name mikesmanilatours.com. You can go onto that website anytime and have a look. Typically, it's not about jobs from Australia, much to what everybody thinks and believes. Most people, yes, they move some jobs from Australia up here, typically a handful of jobs in most cases, and they very quickly discover that with this great resource here, there's a whole lot of other things they can do for their customers, or do to support their marketing, or do to develop new products around what they're doing, and they very quickly jump into that space. That's where my 45 people came from. There's only about 6 or 7 jobs from Australia, and the rest came from the fact that I discovered that I could build a really cool marketing system, lead gen system for my business to generate my leads, generate my customers, and actually make sales from here. That was fantastic, and I built that, and there was no way known you'd ever even think about building that in Australia. So we add new processes, marketing, employment. That's what most do. Several also engage those specialised services, like I mentioned, the accounting before. They go that, they visit them, they see them, they understand it, and they decide they're going to use that as well. They still keep their accountant in Australia, by the way, but they reduce their bill right down to tax advice only. And a few of us will start new businesses as a result of what you're going to see on my tour. And, in red down here, and it really is what it's all about, the industry started with this monkey see, monkey do business where they followed set structured processes, and they just wanted people to follow processes and not think. Well, we've all moved away from that. When the SMEs came into the market and we had to build teams, that was all about the fact that we wanted to focus on higher quality workers. We wanted workers that could think. We wanted to move away from the robotic processes, and that's what we're doing. And what you're really going to see, and what's really going to stand out on my tour, is the way some of us have been able to find some amazing people here, develop them and train them, and get them to think and run parts of our business and develop parts of our business. You're going to see that, and you'll see it firsthand on my tour, mikesmanilatours.com. To finish off, if you email me, and that is my email address, mike@o'hagan.com.au, I'll happily send you a book. The book is titled The Efficient $100 a Week Worker. It covers some of the stuff I've covered in these 3 webinars. Of course, I can't cover everything. The 3-day intensive business tour does cover everything, and that's where you really need to learn the good stuff. So on that note, I thank you, and I thank you very much, and please tell others about this great resource. This is great for every business in Australia. Thank you very much.